A military knife has to do something that almost no other tool is asked to do. Be excellent at contradictory things simultaneously. It has to be light enough to carry all day without noticing it, and heavy enough to drive through material that resists cutting. It has to hold a razor edge through field conditions that destroy razor edges. It has to fit one average-sized hand perfectly while being issued to thousands of hands that aren't average-sized. It has to be simple enough that a soldier can maintain it with almost no tools, and durable enough to survive conditions that destroy complex equipment. And in the worst possible scenario, it has to function as a weapon, which is actually one of the rarer things military knives are used for, compared to cutting rope, opening rations, clearing brush, prying, and 100 other utilitarian jobs. Every military knife ever designed is an attempt to solve this problem. None of them have solved it completely, and every generation of designers has learned from the one before. Today, we're tracing that lineage, from ancient Rome through 2 world wars to the modern tactical knife era, and using the M48 as our lens for understanding where that design tradition stands today. The oldest design problems in military blades were solved a very long time ago, and most of those solutions are still with us. The Roman pugio, a double-edged dagger carried by legionary soldiers from roughly the 1st century BC onward, established the basic geometry that fighting knives have returned to repeatedly across 2,000 years. A blade between 20 and 35 centimeters long, wide enough for rigidity, tapering to a penetrating point, with a grip designed to stay secure in a wet hand. The pugio wasn't a utility tool. It was purpose-built for close combat as a sidearm when the gladius wasn't an option. What's notable about the pugio is how clearly it reflects a deliberate engineering decision. The Romans understood that a fighting knife and a utility blade are not the same thing, and they equipped soldiers accordingly. Medieval knife design evolved this thinking into a range of specialized forms. The rondel dagger, with its stiff, narrow blade, was designed specifically to penetrate armor at close range. The messer was a single-edged fighting blade that influenced Central European combat traditions for centuries. The Scottish dirk developed as both a fighting weapon and a camp tool, a dual-purpose compromise that became its defining characteristic. What all of these blades share is geometry in service of doctrine. They weren't designed in a vacuum. They were designed around specific threats, specific opponents, specific tactical realities. Change the threat, and the blade changes. In the early 19th century, American frontier culture produced one of the most influential blade designs in history, one that shaped military knife thinking for well over a century. The Bowie knife, attributed to Jim Bowie and popularized after the 1827 sandbar fight in Louisiana, combined a heavy single-edged blade with a clipped point and a crossguard into a form that was brutally effective at both fighting and utility work. The clip point, where the back edge of the blade curves concavely toward the tip, allowed for a sharper, more controllable point without sacrificing the structural mass of the blade behind it. That geometry is still called a clip point today, and still appears on tactical knives across the market. The Bowie's influence on American military knife design is hard to overstate. Confederate soldiers in the Civil War carried modified Bowie-style blades in enormous numbers. The knife became culturally embedded in American ideas about what a fighting blade should look like: big, substantial, capable of doing serious work. That cultural weight carried into the 20th century and directly shaped the design decisions that produced the most iconic American military knife ever made. World War I created a knife design problem that nobody had fully anticipated. Trench warfare forced soldiers into close-quarters combat in conditions where rifles were nearly useless. The trenches were too narrow, the fighting too sudden. Soldiers needed something they could use in a confined space against an opponent who might also be wearing body armor, or at least multiple layers of heavy wool and leather. The solution that emerged was the trench knife. The most iconic American example is the M48 Mark I, which combined a triangular section blade with a cast bronze knuckle guard that could function as a striking weapon. The blade's triangular cross-section was a deliberate choice. It made a wound that was harder to close and more difficult to treat. The knuckle guard was there because in a trench, punching was as likely as cutting. European armies developed their own variants, but the principle was consistent. A short, heavy, multi-function weapon for confined spaces with no tactical finesse required. The lesson World War I embedded into military knife design was about versatility under duress. A blade that required skilled technique to use effectively was a liability. The design had to work when the user was exhausted, frightened, and operating with reduced fine motor control. Simplicity and durability over elegance. No conversation about military knife design history gets very far without stopping at the Ka-Bar. The Ka-Bar, formerly the USMC Mark II combat knife, was adopted by the United States Marine Corps in 1942 and became the standard-issue fighting and utility knife for American forces through World War II and beyond. It's still in production today, in essentially the same form, and it remains one of the most respected blade designs ever manufactured. What made the Ka-Bar work was the discipline of its design decisions. The blade is 7 inches long enough for serious utility work, short enough to control. The clip point gives it a capable fighting tip. The fuller, the groove running down the flat of the blade, reduces weight without reducing structural strength. The handle is stacked leather washers compressed onto the tang, which gives grip in wet conditions, absorbs shock, and can be repaired in the field. The finish is a matte black to reduce reflection. Every single one of those choices has a reason. Nothing is decorative. The Ka-Bar became the baseline that most subsequent American military and tactical knife design has been measured against. When designers want to justify a departure from Ka-Bar proportions, they have to answer the question, what does this change solve that the Ka-Bar didn't? That's a high bar to clear. The Cold War era pushed military knife design in a new direction, towards specialized tools for specialized operators. Special Forces doctrine emphasized missions that required more from a knife than conventional infantry deployment. Survival scenarios, infiltration and exfiltration through varied terrain, the possibility of being cut off from resupply for extended periods. The knife had to do more. This produced designs like the V-42 stiletto, issued to the Office of Strategic Services in World War II and designed by Colonel Rex Applegate, a slender, double-edged blade built entirely for offensive combat, with almost no utility function.
And it produced the opposite.
Survival knives, with hollow handles containing matches, fishing line, and compass capsules, popularized by the Randall Model 18 and later by the Buck 184. The tension between these poles, the fighting knife optimized for lethality versus the survival knife optimized for long-term field use, was never fully resolved. Different branches of different militaries came down in different places depending on their doctrine. What the Cold War era did establish was that there was no single correct answer. The right blade depended on the mission. That pluralism carried forward into the modern tactical knife era, which is defined by the proliferation of specialized designs rather than the standardization of one. By the 1980s and 90s, the civilian tactical knife market had become significant enough to drive its own design innovation, feeding ideas back into military and law enforcement procurement. Companies like Benchmade, Spyderco, and Cold Steel were competing on blade geometry, handle materials, locking mechanisms, and steel metallurgy in ways that military procurement, with its cost constraints and standardization requirements, often couldn't match. The folding knife became a serious tactical tool for the first time, as liner locks and axis locks gave one-handed deployment reliable enough for real use. Steel metallurgy advanced sharply. The move from carbon steel to stainless formulations, and then to high-performance tool steels like S30V and D2, gave modern blades edge retention and corrosion resistance that previous generations of military knives couldn't achieve. Handle materials shifted from natural materials to polymers, G10 and micarta, lighter, more stable across temperature and humidity ranges, and cheaper to produce consistently. The visual language of tactical knives also changed. Blade profiles became more aggressive. Serrations appeared on the spine or along the edge. Tanto points, borrowed from Japanese tanto blades, became popular for their tip strength. Whether or not these changes always improved function, they communicated a design philosophy: purpose-built, uncompromising, ready. The M48 line, produced by United Cutlery and developed in partnership with designer Gil Hibben, sits at a specific and interesting point in this history. Hibben is one of the most prolific custom knife designers working today, with a style that draws heavily on the aggressive visual language of the modern tactical era, while incorporating design elements with clear historical lineage. The clip point geometries on several M48 variants trace directly to Bowie-era blade thinking. The fuller on the primary blade echoes Ka-Bar design language. The handle configurations reflect modern polymer ergonomics. What the M48 represents is not a military-issue fighting knife. It's a civilian tactical design that synthesizes the visual and functional vocabulary of a century of military blade development into a format accessible to collectors and enthusiasts. The steel is 2CR13 stainless, a serviceable formulation suited to the civilian market the blade is designed for. The construction is production grade rather than custom shop quality, which puts it in reach of a much wider audience. That positioning is actually historically significant. Every generation of military blade design has eventually filtered down into civilian hands. The Bowie went from frontier combat to general carry within a generation. The Ka-Bar became a fixture in hunting camps within years of World War II. And the M48 is part of how modern tactical design vocabulary reaches the enthusiast market. Understanding what the M48 draws on, the Roman geometry, the Bowie clip point, the Ka-Bar proportions, the Cold War survival knife ethos, is understanding that no blade design is invented from nothing. Every edge, every curve, every handle radius has a lineage. 2,000 years of military knife design converge on a short list of things that nobody has found a way around. A blade has to be the right length for its primary purpose. It has to hold an edge long enough to be useful between sharpenings. The handle has to stay put in a stressed, wet hand. The geometry has to match the work. A tip optimized for penetration is a different shape from a tip optimized for slicing. And the whole thing has to be simple enough that a person under pressure can use it without thinking about it. Every design era has changed the materials, the manufacturing process, the finishing, and the aesthetics. The underlying logic hasn't changed.
That's what makes this history worth understanding.
It shows that the best design thinking isn't about novelty. It's about solving the same fundamental problems with whatever tools and materials each era makes available. The Roman pugio, the Ka-Bar, and the M48 are three very different objects that are all answers to the same question. Drop a comment. Which era of military blade design do you think produced the most interesting engineering? I read every one. And if you want more videos on the history and engineering behind iconic tools and technologies, subscribe and hit the notification bell. New video every week. I'll see you in the next one.